If you've been arrested for drunk driving, the first call you need to make is to attorney Ted Morgan. You can't afford to go it alone. You need to know your rights. You need someone with the experience to put your DUI behind you. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Call 706-317-5733. Ask for Ted.
Call Ted Morgan Law when you need a lifeline.
Hello and welcome back to DUI Law Real Talk with Ted Morgan. Ted is a seasoned trial attorney who has spent the last 30 years defending drivers in DUI and criminal cases in Georgia. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today's episode we are talking about DUI task forces in Georgia and how enforcement actually works behind the scene. Hello, Ted. It's great to see you again.
Hey, Leanne, it's great to see you. Avoid the task force.
Okay, well, let's dig into that then. So, Ted, in Georgia, what does the term DUI task force actually refer to?
Well, I think it would probably be the same in a lot of states, but a task force are typically officers that are highly trained and probably have a lot of experience just with DUI, or they wouldn't be on the task force. So we tend to see just that. Typically, I think around here, those task force are also a lot more aggressive. And I don't mean that critically, although it shows sometimes. But that's what you see. They know they're out there to find DUIs. They typically know how to do that and keep it within the lines, so to speak, so it doesn't foul up their arrest. And then they're very well trained, so they typically aren't going to make as many mistakes as we might see with a law enforcement officer that just hasn't had that much experience in training.
So how are DUI task forces typically structured, and what agencies are usually involved?
Well, you can have it in any law enforcement agency. Our situation here in Columbus is a lot like in several cities in Georgia right now. The Georgia State Troopers, they have what I believe is actually federally funded, but it's what they call the Nighthawks. And you actually see it on the citation. It'll say GSP Trooper John Doe, and then over to the right, it'll say Nighthawk Division. And that's the DUI task force. So you see them very formally organized. And then locally in the police department, I know again here, they have what's called a motor squad. And the motor squad is just a collection of guys or gals that are probably, again, got plenty of experience. They've definitely been trained on the field sobriety test and spotting what we'll say is indicative of DUI drivers. And so when they have their numbers on the patrol, they have enough officers employed, I'm saying, that they can literally put the officers out on the street just to do DUIs. If their numbers are down, they need the officers to respond to anything and everything. So that's how I typically see it, unless it's a roadblock, but that doesn't have to be a task force.
So based on what you have seen, when and where do these task forces tend to be most active?
Right next to the bar. They're very good at that. And yours truly, I remember I had cases for a long time I kept seeing at this one bar that we'll call it Joe's Bar because I don't want to call it by its real name. And you kept seeing, I was like, well, where were you? Well, I had just come out of Joe's Bar. Well, I don't live too far from Joe's Bar myself. And sure enough, one night, I came out of a restaurant that is very, very close to the same shopping center and got pulled over because he thought I came out of Joe's Bar. And that officer had incredible vision. And you asked me about these task forces. I guess they have incredible vision because it was 10 o'clock, pitch black dark. And he said, your window tint on your truck is too dark, is why I pulled you over. And I said, wow, you have some really good eyes since the sun's not out. But he chuckled and I chuckled, and then he realized I wasn't drinking. But that's what they do, and is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But yeah, they know where the bars are in town, and so they're gonna be in those areas because they know that's fertile ground, right?
Well, also from your perspective, how do DUI stops connected to task forces tend to show up in the cases that you handle compared to routine stops?
I think what we see more with the task force. I'll give you an example. Um, I had one client that the actual reason that the patrolman gave her for pulling her over was she had pulled up to a red light on a major artery coming out of downtown Columbus, where there are a lot of bars, and stopped at the red light, turned right, and he came to the window, and she says, back and forth they go, and she says, "Well, I know I stopped, and you turn right on red in Georgia. I know I stopped." And he says, "Yeah, but you pulled up past the stop bar." Okay, so be advised, don't pull up past stop bars at night near a bar. Tag lights being out. I've had a case where a patrolman went flying down Broad Street down here downtown because the guy's tag lights were out. He admitted it on the stand. He was a DUI task force. That's why he was so concerned about the tag lights, was because he knew there were a lot of bars around. And I'm giving those examples because other times, what I'll say are the more honest stops are where somebody was swerving and couldn't stay in their lane, or they were going 60 and a 30 in the middle of town. Those get you pulled over. So I hope those examples can give you an idea of what we kind of see more of on the task force side and what we see on just normal, what I'll call normal patrol. And I don't mean that to be super critical of the task force. They do make arrests that are, I'll say, good arrests. Not everybody's innocent, right? Not everybody's guilty, but just to be clear.
I'm kind of curious if it is a task force and they're looking specifically for DUI, but they do pull over for, say, going past the stop bar. Would that person then potentially still get a ticket, even though she wasn't drinking?
It gets interesting there. There's some U.S. Supreme Court law that I'll say helps them out a little bit. What you have to prove essentially is they really had no reason to pull the car over. But if you pull up past the stop bar, you are committing a traffic violation. So if they can show reasonable suspicion that you committed a traffic violation, they can pull you over. And then after that, when they come to the window of your car and they smell alcohol on your breath, well, then that gives them the right to pursue that investigation because the law says it does. They just have to have a reasonable articulable suspicion that another crime is being committed, and then they're allowed to investigate briefly that crime. So that's kind of how that ties in, Leanne.
So what differences do you tend to see in the evidence or structure of a case when a task force is involved versus when it's not?
Well, they're gonna have, I'll say, better reports, incident reports, arrest reports. For instance, the Georgia State Trooper Task Force here, it's the same format. It's a form that they use, and it is clearly created for DUIs. I mean, it has a block for each standardized field sobriety test. It has questions that you're not going to ask a guy who got, pulled over and you didn't suspect DUI. They are very tailored to, I'll say, help the officer make sure he does a thorough investigation, right? That's what you tend to see versus where someone gets pulled over by a less experienced officer or maybe one that has a lot of experience, just not with DUIs. Then sometimes we see what the information they gather is a little more scattered and not as thorough. That's the biggest difference.
Can you tell us what a concentrated enforcement effort is, and when are those most common?
Well, I think the concentrated enforcement just means that they huddled up at headquarters one day and said, "Hey, it's It's we just had St. Patrick's Day. We're going to concentrate enforcement on people driving drunk, and so they try to see how many officers they can assign to some sort of task force or whatever you want to call it, concentrated enforcement effort. I think that's kind of what we're talking about there. It may not be a task force assigned officer who that's all he does. And back to the Georgia State Troopers, that is their job every time they go out, DUI task force. Whereas the concentrated enforcement effort may be a one-time thing that a commander in the law enforcement decides, hey, we're gonna go out hard this weekend because it's spring break.
So during these enforcement periods, what tends to catch drivers off guard about how those stops unfold? Are they different?
I think what catches them off guard is how easy it was to get pulled over, and then how easy it was to get arrested for DUI. Again, I'm not trying to make a political statement. I'm just saying that some of the task force, I think they have quotas, whether they're stated or not. And, the days of, hey, I'm okay. I've had a drink or two, but I'm okay. I can make it home, and I live just right up the road here, or I'll leave my car here and take the bus or get a cab, get an Uber. No, you're going to go to jail. And so I think that's what surprises a lot of folks is that they don't feel that they are intoxicated or had too much to drive, and they feel like the officer arrested them simply because they admitted they'd had a beer. And again, we see the full gamut of that, but I think that's probably the biggest surprise.
How do these concentrated enforcement efforts affect the volume and types of DUI cases that you end up seeing? Do you see a uptick in volume after, say, a holiday, 4th of July?
It is really funny, Lisa. I can remember a couple of times after a holiday, and we were worried. We're like, gosh, the phone didn't ring. What happened? We're still here, right? And other times where it does. And it's really more a function of the individual who got arrested. Some people look for a lawyer right away. Some do not. And that's what we learned is that, in February, we see a lot of the DUI clients coming in that were arrested around Christmas because they just waited. So sure, sometimes you see it tick up and that's what it was. But more likely than not, we see it tick up because the task force has been active for several weeks in a row. That's what I think.
So when someone encounters a checkpoint or a task force stop, where do they tend to misunderstand what's happening?
I think part of it is, again, what we call the surprise is that, I'm getting arrested for this. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty sober. I just had some alcohol, and they feel like that they've got to be a lot more intoxicated than they are to be arrested, and they may be right. But I think too, a checkpoint or a roadblock, if that's what we're driving at, that would shock anybody who's never been through one, because sometimes you go up on a roadblock and you think, oh, there must be a wreck up here. There's a long line of cars and I see a lot of patrol lights ahead of us. And then when you get up there, you realize, no, this is a roadblock where they're checking for either, I don't know, felons not felons, but people who have arrest warrants. They're checking for DUIs. They're just checking everything. And that can be a bit of a heartache when you realize, oh, I just drove into a roadblock for DUIs and I just left the bar.
Well, as we wrap up today's episode, when a DUI arrest comes out of a task force stop, how does that context tend to influence how the case moves forward?
I think we try to take the same approach in how we analyze cases, what we do to investigate it, the information we get for a client. I tend to not try to veer off that just because it was a roadblock. But there are legal issues, for instance, if it was a roadblock that you don't have on other cases, and that's why. But there are always intricacies to look at. It's just if it's a task force stop, say like the Nighthawks, I I will say, I think even the prosecutors and the judges realize that this isn't your granddad's DUI arrest where they were so drunk they couldn't get out of the car and they let you walk home maybe if you can walk. Those days are over in a lot of your busy task force jurisdictions. They're not. That's just not how things are approached. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's the difference. We're less tolerant of it, and maybe that's a good thing. So I think that's the only big thing we see. And sometimes what I'm getting at is that how the prosecution might approach a case, given that it was a task force stop. Let's say we don't have any blood alcohol measurement. The first thing I remind them of is, well, this was a Nighthawk stop, and we know that it's very rare that they're going to let anybody walk away if they smell alcohol. And that's how I see it.
Well, that is it for today's episode of DUI Law Real Talk. If you or someone you know has been charged with a DUI in Georgia and has questions about how enforcement works or what to expect, visit tedmorganlaw.com to schedule a consultation with Ted. And remember to leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss any episodes. Thanks for listening, and good to see you, Ted.
Good to see you, Leanne, and thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.